Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm going to do just going to stream the, what I have is I'm going to install Ubuntu Studio 18.10 just recently came out. I've been using not a spare machine, but one of the machines I have here as my editing studio or my editing workstation. So what I'm going to do is just essentially walk through installing that because I've had 1804 and I want to keep up with the latest applications because Ubuntu Studio doesn't have any long-term support for their studio stuff. Plus, to see if anyone to show people, creative people that want to maybe give this a go, see what it's like. Okay, so without further ado, let me get going on that. So I actually do have, you'll see here, depending on your setup, you'll have you may have, it'll recognize your drives, but we'll just walk through the installer. So I will click on this, and it's going to be a little slow because I'm running it through an external DVD. You do need a DVD for this. We'll see here in a second. I want to say it's several gigs. It's definitely too big to fit on a standard CD. You could also burn it to a flash drive. I would say, a rewritable DVD. If you have a portable DVD player, I know, those have gone the way of the dinosaur. Essentially, most machines don't come with DVD drives, but I may do a video on that at some point. But assuming, since this isn't a prepping your setup, this is essentially an installation. So maybe I'll do that in a follow-up, but yeah, there will be a bit of a drag. So as you actually saw, these drives here essentially disappeared because the installer is going to essentially pull that in and use that will be the install media. I have a second drive that I disconnected just on the off chance that I mess anything up, and that's always the best case. Especially to avoid any weird hardware issues. That really doesn't happen that much nowadays, but yeah, it's best to be safe than sorry. So here I'm going English. I do know other languages, but English is my primary language. I've been accustomed, and I use the Dvorak keyboard. So at that point, I may do that in the future, because there's a nice way you can switch between the Dvorak style layout and the US, and that also helps with anyone that wants to do or maybe try out different versions or different keyboard layouts. They're not versions because it's all software based, but so I'm going to go ahead and continue with that. And since it's already connected to that network, I'm going to do the downloads and install third-party software. I know some people that in terms of, how they want their distribution, they want free as in freedom. That I get, I understand that, but, if everyone played by that set of rules, then it wouldn't be an issue, or, we wouldn't have problems. I got a development machine that I tried installing, that I installed Parabola. I didn't try it, it succeeded. The problem is that I couldn't get VirtualBox installed on it. It just didn't have it. I wanted to add the packages, and it just seemed more of a hassle because the way Parabola is set up, and I'll add a link, but this is more of a digression to keep from just watching the cursor spin, that they have software on there to ensure that it is free as in free software, free as in freedom, not just free as in free beer, because the Parabola, which is a Free Software Foundation sanctioned version of Arch Linux. So Arch Linux allows proprietary firmware, various other closed or proprietary software. So for those that don't know proprietary software, and I know this I got to remember my audience, proprietary software is software that is not inspected or is not easily viewable by the general public or software developers. Not that you're giving it away for free, but I want to make sure that the software you're doing is, there aren't any security issues. I want to look it over as, maybe even a customer Sometimes they do that with certain companies, and you have to be big enough, and essentially you're signing a non-disclosure agreement, or what, an NDA. But then again, you can't tell anybody like, oh, we're not going with these guys because the way they're doing the security is just set to fail. Whereas open source, as the term defines, or as it states, it is the source code for that software is open and available for everyone. And that's generally why a lot of places, there's a company called Red Hat, and they've essentially, that whole company's founded, and that's how they started. They make their money and they release their software, but for the most part, the way they make their money is through service contracts. Large companies or even businesses don't have the time to essentially hassle or kind of work their way through issues. They'd rather pay someone money that they can get someone on the phone, and they're having an issue. I'm paying you because if I need support, you're going to resolve it for me in no time flat, or as quick as possible. I don't want to have to spend salary time on someone trying to figure out why this isn't working or why there's this issue. Right. Okay. This seems to be dragging really, really long. Okay. I may cut the video here and just wait for this, because I don't want to just sit there and just completely ramble and then get caught on that. So, yeah, I'll be right back. Oh my God. Okay, we're back. It actually wasn't that long, but I still cut it anyways, because there is some yawning going on my behalf, or on my part, I should say, not really my behalf. Okay, it actually didn't take very long for that. It came up very quickly, so, but I still cut it because there's just moments of just dead air. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go with the defaults and install all the options. I'm not going to go through all of these because this is there's a significant amount, and if you want to go through, you can look at the website. I'll add the link in the description, but you can see the different packages that are essentially bundled with Ubuntu Studio. Sorry about that. Let's see, anything of interest in terms of, for my use, even for streaming or just tutorials, there is the following. The Audacity. So this is a audio editor. I do use that for some of the audio, trying to either remove clicks or amplify the sound. Whereas, as I've been told in the past, I'm not loud enough, and I get that. As a consumer of YouTube, it's when the ads are loud, or the intro and outro are just ridiculously loud, and the audio inside is like somebody talking from across the room. So I'm not smack talking. I'm just saying that I understand where people are coming from when they say you need to speak up. So I get that, and I sympathize with them. So Audacity is great. I was quickly scrolling through this. I don't see any others that I use on a regular basis. I will have these in here. So here's Bluetooth, so desktop core. I'm not going to do the audio plugins because, as I mentioned, it would be just as new for me as it would be for anyone else that's never installed or used anything of significant audio applications. Actually, let's just click on it and see. There may be stuff, it may be plugins here for Audacity, and it does have its own setup. So no, this is just the other thing too. This organ emulator. There's tons of stuff in here that for people that are musically creative. This is the whole reasoning behind the Ubuntu Studio distribution, is that it's creative visually, and they're like multimedia, visual in terms of either video production, photo editing, and audio in terms of musicians and various other people who do audio recordings, things like that. This core stuff is like the printer, Bluetooth. So I'm just going to quickly scroll through that. That's stuff that you would find essentially on any or on most Ubuntu distributions. The fonts. So for those of you that do a lot of desktop publishing, there's a fairly big font selection. And one of my close friends does a lot of he's essentially a graphic designer, does animation, and I know he's like, I got a list, 100 times that. Once I saw it, it was ridiculous, but for me, it's all nice and interesting. Blender, for anyone that does 3D modeling. So here's the more interesting. I've used Blender a little bit, not too much. GIMP, right, which stands for graphic image manipulation. It's whenever I tell anybody about that program, I immediately go into explaining the acronym because you get the stares, and I get it. But yeah, software developers, they like their little making up acronyms that are sometimes clever, other times just make for funny or awkward conversation. GIMP I use regularly. I do that to edit the thumbnails, add images. The color picker sometimes can be useful if you're looking for a specific color on an image, which this runs separate or independent of any of GIMP. GIMP does have one itself, but instead of saying firing up GIMP, which is a fairly heavy program, you can use this as you're working on anything else. Working on, say, manuscript, or you're typing or a letter, whatever the case may be, you can just have that sitting there in the background. So Inkscape is a vector-based drawing. I've seen, people do some work with it, but not a whole lot. There was another one in terms of desktop publishing, but I don't see it. That must be down here where it says publishing. So I think I'm getting a little ahead of myself. This Wacom one, so I do have a old Wacom bamboo tablet, so I've made sure that this is enabled. Photography should come back into, so GIMP will still be listed here. I'm going to leave that enabled. The capture and control, or control and capture, that I've not used, but I do have, I don't see it here. That must be an extra add-on. There is a KDE, which is a different desktop environment. They have a photography program called Digicam, and that one's really, really nice. I may actually do a video on that, but that's going to be on my very long to-do list of things I do a video or just a quick talk through. I'm sure there's many more videos that people have done, but for the most part, the Digicam's the one I use. There are several others, but I don't see actually any kind of what I would consider image organization or like library software. So here under publishing, yeah, I don't even see the, oh, here it is. Open source desktop desktop page layout. Scribus, I want to say it's Scribus. That I've used here and there, a lot more than some of these other programs. It's, I would say, third on the list, right, with the video, audio, GIMP, and then that Scribus would be the next on the list. Here, KDN Live, this one I use extensively because this is what I use to actually edit the videos I publish on YouTube. OpenShot. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I'm not sure. No, sorry. I was thinking of Shotwell. So that's a image organization cataloging program. OpenShot's also another video editor. This one, Pitivi, I'm probably butchering it. I'm leaving all of these because sometimes there can be some really interesting things with some of these video editors. With others, they have greater flexibility, but the learning curve can be pretty steep. KDN Live was I wouldn't say a huge learning curve for me, but I've never touched video editor, and that was the first one I went with. So that's what I've become accustomed to. And as I find things that I cannot figure out, fairly quickly, I jump on YouTube and search a tutorial video. So, and I may actually do some of them, not just for my benefit, for those that also want to learn, because, it's always better to, maybe some people learn from someone based on their, how they describe things, or just, their approach and their flow to their workflow. So I'm just going to hit continue. As you saw, I didn't remove or unselect any of the options. I'm just going to install everything, let it rip. And so here, this Ubuntu 18.04.1, that's the old Ubuntu Studio. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to click that, erase everything. It's nice of them, and I know this is probably through experience, that they put this big red warning. It should be bigger. The font should be bold and essentially screaming out to you. So I'm going to do something else. And that something else being is that this here that's highlighted, that's my home directory. So I've learned after having to install and having some going back to very old Ubuntu distributions that sometimes the installs wouldn't work and it would trash. And if you had everything on one partition, where it would be one partition if it was just SDA1, SDA2, and SDA2 would be the swap that you have your root or your root. So if you're coming from the Windows side of the operating systems, this would be your C drive, and this would be like a D drive with all of your user files. So this is what I use SDA2 for, or a completely separate partition. It's not a separate hard drive, it's just a separate partition, because what I want to do is I want to change that to use, and I'm going to format this, and I'm going to set it as the root. So / is the root, is the uppermost level of the directory tree in Linux Unix. So and let's see, you cannot undo this operation. Yes, so here you have to kind of be careful. Continue with that, and here you'll see where I'm moving the mouse cursor is this is a little laptop drive. It's not very big, but this just essentially holds the OS, my home directory with some my preference for terminal editor and a couple other things, some config files, and I have a completely separate 3 terabyte drive that stores all my actual data files. So if something happens to one drive, this one being the OS one, then my data is safe. It's best to keep it separate. So it formatted that. As you can see, it changed the U space. Now here is my home partition. I'm going to tell it it's ext4. I'm not going to select format. I'm going to select OK, and I'm just going to leave it as is. So if it was selected for format, this little box here would be selected, or it would be checked but selected as blue, whereas this one here above is. So this is what I want. Here the format, the swap area, there really isn't an option. I mean, there's an option to change it, but I'm going to keep the swap there. And if you have multiple drives and partitions, you want to ensure that this is selected for the unnumbered or the root of that drive. So SDA, not SDA1 or SDA2. You can set that up to have multiple Linux installs, but that's advanced to expert, and that's what I'm saying. Most people, even if someone's coming from a creative, that kind of background, right, Mac OS or Windows, they're like, that's already way above their heads, or they've already tuned out because I've rambled on to far excess detail that was necessary. So just to recap really quick, root partition formatted, set up and ready to go, ready for the new OS to be installed. So wiped out the old one. My home partition with some of my personal files and various other things that I want mounted, but I do not want it formatted because it would erase all of my files. Make a quick visual double check, and I'll hit install. And now here it's just going to go through the process of before it actually gets to the installing, it's going to ask me, okay, so what's your username? So here's some configuration stuff. Essentially define your time zone. Now here's the username. So I don't really fill out the full name because it's not necessary. And I do select the login automatically. I do not recommend that if there's a potential for someone else to use it, not to do anything nefarious or anything, like going in and deleting your files, but if there are, like, say you have teenagers, small children, only because it's the possibility of destroying or deleting files can be that much more dangerous. Especially, say, if you have like a co-op working space or shared office, always select the require my password. Login automatically is, unless you have very specific circumstances, you should be selecting require my password to log in. As I mentioned, mine is within my arm's reach, and I also run a program called Synergy. I think it's now called Seamless, but that allows me to share a keyboard from one machine to the other. And I may do that as an install, but the installation of it is very, very quick, and it doesn't really require, the configuration's fairly straightforward. But if there is an interest, I'll do it. Now here, now the system's off and running in terms of copying the files. What I'll probably do here is I might speed up the video, because it's something I've not done. So I want to see if I can actually succeed in that. If not, I'll just cut the video and then jump back in once the install's finally complete, let it reboot, and then show everyone what the desktop looks like for the Ubuntu Studio 18.10. So let's see what happens. So it looks like the installer is finally done. So I'm not going to do continue testing. What I'm going to do is just restart it now. And we'll go through, and what I'll do is just show a little bit of the hardware, but maybe we can see some of it, because there may be some issues. No, we'll just go in. The reason I'm saying that is that depending on your hardware, like if you have if you're going to be doing some video editing, you want to take advantage of a GPU. When and if you do have it, I'm assuming you wouldn't be doing any video editing without a nice GPU. And okay, right, so that's just heard it ejecting. So here it is going to power on. And I actually have some video in terms of how I was setting this machine up. I need to continue doing that now that I have a 1080p capable essentially camera. It's a little Fuji. I just take photos of it and then go from there, but anyways, it'll do 1080p at 60 frames. I'm using the Elgato here. I may add a screenshot to show how I kind of had that full screen set up, but once this is completely up and running, we will start to look around to see the different type of hardware. Well, in terms of any additional, there's and we get to it here in a second. There is so that was my home directory. That's not the default. So this will be interesting to see how well that successfully worked. So far, it's not looking great. Oh, there we go. And that was the last note I had. So this is configured to my old setup. So as for those of you that saw or that kind of followed through with the setup, in terms of how I wanted to configure it, that I wanted my home directory, etc., etc. Now, it mounted it, and it didn't do any additional these. So this is not the default. This is, as I was saying earlier, as you see, here's the time format. This is my preferred format, the year, month, day, and 24-hour time clock. Here's a keyboard setting where you could change the layout. Right now it's US English. If I click on it, left click, it goes English Dvorak, but it kind of runs off the screen. So I'll leave that selected. As I mentioned, I may do that as a separate video because it's not very involved, but it's kind of good to know, especially if you're going to try to set your, if not, I wouldn't say set yourself up, but if you want to practice or learn a different keyboard layout, or even experiment with one, it's nice to know you can, with the mouse, not the keyboard, how to switch between layouts. So let's go to the menu, and we are going to go to let's just go here, the all settings. So this is the settings, and what I meant about the additional hardware was this additional drivers. So I'll double click on that, and I do have an additional a PCI GPU card. When I finish completing the videos on that hardware setup, I'll go ahead and include that images and kind of a walkthrough. I want to use a binary driver from NVIDIA that typically has better performance. I know there's some issues. I think the ATI. So here now, if say with the install video that you saw and the account, if there's only one account, you have the root or the super user, also called root, permissions. And so when it comes up to enter the root or super user or admin password, if you have one account or the first account you create, that's the one that has that. So that's why I typed it in, and then have to switch accounts. If there's multiple people on the machine, the first one to set it up, they'll be the one to either have to enter it, or you'll have to ask them to type in the password. So here I'm going to essentially activate the binary drivers. So the GeForce, as I mentioned, I'm not really into a lot of like desktop gaming. I've got an Xbox One, so I do mostly console gaming. But in terms of like high-end graphics cards, I really don't have anything like that. But I do have this NVIDIA card, which is useful for KDN Live, because as that program progresses and more features get added to it, the OpenCL and CUDA, essentially the GPU, how would I describe that? The GPU software, specialized software. Let's go with that. So CUDA and OpenCL are two names for specialized software that ATI cards and NVIDIA cards can use. If you've seen videos or heard of people who do Bitcoin mining with graphics cards, that's essentially what they're using. Specialized programs written to take advantage of that that high-end graphics card. Video editors can do that. I'm probably talking to the coaching the team here for those that are coming from a video editing background, because they have Windows machines with graphics drivers, the Adobe suites, and various other high-end software programs essentially build most of their products around advanced and high-end graphics cards, because that's the best way to get the fastest and most efficient workloads done. So this will take a bit to install, and I'm just going to move that out of the way while that's going, because I want to quickly show essentially what I have in terms of hardware. There is one program, and I don't recall if I installed it or not. It's not there. And do I actually want to go through the process of installing? Right now, with this going, I couldn't install other software. Although it's a different window, the package and software installer is essentially being occupied with this the binary. So now that it's done, I'll be able to go into it. So I'll close that, and well, let me just do this graphically. Typically I do all of my software installs via the command line, but since I'm doing somewhat of a install and like a quick setup, so now that you see here, there's this NVIDIA that wasn't there before, but it's here now. And let's do software. So this is going to be new for me because I've never really used this software. As you can see, it gives me a welcome. I'll just move this out of the way. And okay, so I'm going to use the magnifying, which is now no longer magnifying, it's essentially the search icon. And I'm going to type hard info. There we go. So system profiler, so you can read the description here. I'm going to click on that, click install. And so as I mentioned before, the application attempting to acquire privileges. So this here is where you would need the root or super user, or if you have multiple accounts, the first account that was created, that person's or that account's password. Okay, as that installs, close down settings because I'm really not going to go back to that. And I'll just launch that from here. Close this. And important, I will do that later, so I'm not going to bother with that right now. So as you can see here, there is a quick, might as well go full screen. That is a quick kind of overview of what this machine has. So as you saw, or as you were following, the Ubuntu Studio 1810, it's a integrated Radeon 7600, 4 compute, 6 GPU cores. I know it's, there's, well, you already have a integrated processor GPU. Why would you add an external card? As I mentioned, the NVIDIA stuff, there's just better support for it, which can be unfortunate because you're buying a processor that has integrated GPU. You should, right? Keyword, be able to take advantage of it with the software, but sometimes that's maybe probably the biggest complaint people have on Linux, but there are workarounds. Like with everything, Mac OS, there's workarounds hardware-wise, or you just pay up front with a lot of money, or with Windows, you have weird kind of sketchy driver issues sometimes, or just incompatibilities. But try supporting the hardware that Windows does. It's kind of a feat. 16 gigs, but it's reported as this because the GPU kind of just reserves off some portion of it, right? Running 1920 by 1080. I've got one hard drive here. As I mentioned, I've not reconnected my media video drive, and that's pretty much what this has here. It's the audio card. There isn't really anything special about this. It's a little desktop machine that I have here. You could do some GPU, these benchmarks, but I'm not going to do that. That's really not the point of this video, and I don't want it to go on any further than it already has. So if you've gone this far in the video, thanks. Hopefully this was interesting and useful for you, and maybe you get something out of it. If there's anything, or let me know in the comments. I'll do the best I can to look through them, but yeah, well, thanks for following on.